Right, this next interview now has got much to do about human rights and education. The right to basic education is, of course, enshrined in the Constitution of South Africa, yet sometimes that very right is violated by some education institutions that are meant to uphold it. Well, as the 2015 academic year begins next week, the South African Human Rights Commission has already received a complaint of an alleged discrimination incident against a learner in Limpopo. Well, to talk to us more on the right to basic education, we are now joined in studio by Kayum Ahmed. He's South African Human Rights Commission's CEO. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's perhaps begin by giving some context to this basic right to education. What are some of the ways in which it is violated?
So Section 29 of the Constitution sets out very clearly that everyone in South Africa has the right to basic education. And it's one of those rights that's completely unfettered. In other words, many other rights described in the Constitution would say that one has the right to access certain rights, for example, housing. Whereas with education, it's not constrained by questions of resources or resource limitations. It's an inherent right that every single citizen has. Some of the major achievements that have taken place over the last 20 years have been around access to basic education. And we've seen a huge increase, and I think government must be congratulated for ensuring that we have a near 100% access to basic education. But some of the major challenges we continue to face, and some of the popular issues have been around questions of textbooks, for example, class infrastructure, teacher training. These are some of the key issues. And more recently, we're seeing an increase in cases of discrimination against learners in schools, whether on the basis of disability or race, which is a major problem 20 years into our democracy.
Let's talk figures now. How many cases are we talking about here that have come to your attention?
On an annual basis, the South African Human Rights Commission deals with approximately 10,000 cases a year, which is a significant amount of cases when you consider that we are a fairly young democracy. Out of those 10,000 cases, the overwhelming majority of cases continue to be race-related, I'm afraid. And so 21 years now into our democracy, this is a major issue that we are tackling as the Human Rights Commission, and particularly in schools where we assume that younger people may be less engaged in questions of race and hate speech. But we do find that social media, Twitter and Facebook is now being used as tools to perpetuate the sort of racism and hate speech we see in South African classrooms. And this is deeply concerning for us. Teacher training and teacher education is another element that I think we need to focus on. We've had cases of teachers discriminating against students in class in a very open and public manner. And I think these are some of the major challenges we continue to face in South Africa today.
And what sort of recourse is there? If I'm a parent and I'm feeling that in one way or another my child's right to basic education is being infringed, what do I do? Where do I go?
We had a fascinating case in the Free State not too long ago where various children were being discriminated against by their teacher. This teacher had the old South African flag in the front of the classroom. He went around to kids in the class, held a mirror up to their faces and asked them what they saw. And when the kids were too afraid to respond, he shouted at them, "You see a baboon, you see a monkey." He also used the K word in many instances. What was fascinating about the case is that eventually one parent brought a complaint to the commission. When we interviewed the children in the classroom, 81% of them said that they had reported this case to their parents, but only one parent came forward to the commission. And upon further investigation, we discovered that in a school in which the overwhelming majority of teachers are white and the students are black, it was the parent of the white pupil who decided to lodge a complaint to the commission. Black parents of black pupils who were targeted by the racist teacher remain silent. And so parents often have a responsibility and obligation to raise these concerns with the commission. But because of the systemic nature of racism and discrimination in South Africa, you often find that black South Africans continue to remain silent and to be afraid to raise these kinds of questions. So the recourse that they have is to come to the Human Rights Commission to raise concerns with the school directly, with the school governing body. But the Commission is able to play an intermediary role between the parents on the one hand and the school on the other.
If I may interject there and say, are the parents aware that they have that avenue? Do you have the capacity to go out into the far-flung areas of South Africa, the rural areas, and perhaps township schools, the areas where parents and children need the education to be upheld, or that right to be upheld the most, arguably? Do they have access to that information?
I'll be the first to acknowledge that the Human Rights Commission clearly has significant limitations in terms of our ability to go out into rural areas and far-flung areas in South Africa to talk openly about the people's rights and responsibilities. And one of the major challenges we have, and we're focusing on right now, is to try and do a lot more human rights education in those particular areas. But parents themselves, I think, have various routes that they can take in order to gain knowledge and access to information, such as the South African Human Rights Commission website, as well as pamphlets and materials. We've got offices in every single province across the country to access this sort of information. But we recognize that this is one of the major shortcomings of our ability to provide this information to parents. Nevertheless, we encourage anyone with these sorts of complaints to come to the Commission's offices.
As briefly as possible, we have run out of time, unfortunately. I wanted to find out the parents' role and responsibility to upholding this right to basic education. It's the beginning of the year. Many grade 1 learners are supposed to go into schools. The parents may not have applied. Perhaps they haven't paid the fees. Perhaps they're late. Whatever reason, it's their fault. And they're often quick to run and say, my child's right to basic education is being infringed when I haven't done my duty as a parent. What happens in that case? Very briefly.
Absolutely. Parents have absolute responsibility to ensure that their kids are enrolled on time. I think we can only expect so much from departments of education to assist parents. But I think I want to encourage all parents right now to make sure that their kids are in school. It is a constitutional right, it's a constitutional imperative, and this must be facilitated by the parents themselves.
Thank you so very much for your time. Kayum Ahmed is the CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission. Well,